Okay, I mean, modern communication, text, email, that's all great. But, look, we got to talk. I got to hear your voice. I got to know you. I got to be able to look in your soul a little bit before I even write the first note. That's just me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and teachers in the band community. I'm thrilled to announce a new partnership between the Everything Band podcast and Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel to over 40 destinations. They offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, William Owens. Hi, Willie.
Hey, Mark. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be great. And so, Willie, you're a pretty well-known composer, especially in the middle school ranks, but can you take a moment to introduce yourself for my listeners who may not know you?
I can. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, not all that far from St. Louis. I attended Vandercook College of Music in Chicago, graduated from 1985, and I began my teaching career in Texas in a small town in South Texas known as Los Fresnos, which is just a little ways away from Brownsville. And that's where I began my career, and I taught for 30 years in the Brownsville area, in the Lubbock, Texas area, which is where I met my wife. I came to the Metroplex in the early 21st century, 2001, and that is where my wife and I reside now.
Excellent. And you're also you also write music and do guest conducting and clinicking, right?
Yes, sir. Quite a bit.
Yeah. So now you mentioned that you were born in Gary, Indiana, and you went to Vandercook. Can you tell me about your musical childhood? Did you grow up in a musical home, and when did you start playing?
Okay, no, I didn't grow up in a musical home, so to speak. My parents, I get asked all the time if my parents were professional teachers or musicians, and they were not. They were both blue-collar, but my father, he was an amateur musician, if you wanted to call it that. He never really played an instrument per se, but, there were always guitars and harmonicas around the house that, my dad loved to pick on, to play around with. We bought an electric Hammond organ at one point. I think I got a lot more use out of it than he did. He bought it for him, but I basically stole it from him. And I played around with and experimented. And that's where I got familiar with chords and developed a little bit of technique. And those were exciting times. My father loved music, particularly the blues. He loved B.B. King, huge fan of B.B. King. And so quite indirectly, I would have to say my dad was one of my big influences. I don't think either of us came to realize it, not me until recently. And that's kind of how I say nowadays I got going in the home. I had two very influential band directors growing up, Mr. James Green, who was my beginner teacher, and I played in the Catholic Youth Organization band up there in Northwest Indiana. And then I went on to Andrean High School in Merrillville, Indiana, where Ann Betts was my high school band director. And she was one of my biggest influences. She still is. That lady was my hero. She still is today. She and I are good friends today. And, she was a huge influence. She taught me private lessons. She is the one that introduced me to Vandercook College of Music. And I owe her so much, and I'm just so grateful for that experience. I had about as great of a high school band experience as a kid could ask for. So I'm very blessed in that respect.
So what do you remember from that high school band experience? What made that so special for you?
Well, again, my director, Mrs. Ann Betts, and I, we connected quite quickly. I was interested in playing many instruments, and she was just very encouraging. She was she still is. She was a great musician. She was a great woodwind player, and she played in the North Shore Concert Band at the time under John Painter, who hosted festivals there at Northwestern University. And I got involved, participating in those festivals because, they had events for high school kids. And Ann got me involved in those. So from my sophomore year, between Vandercook and Northwestern University, I spent a good bit of time just being around the people and listening to the groups and just getting, more and more learned and excited about the band world. So, that was a huge influence.
Yeah, sure. Those are some important names, John Painter and being involved with the Chicagoland music in that time, in that period, must have been exceptional.
Right. No, exceptional. Very exciting. I listened to that group because, again, my band director played in that band. And later on, when I was in college, there was a temporary opening, and I played saxophone in a North Shore band right next to Ann. So that was very exciting. I love that.
Cool. And you're a saxophone player?
Yes, sir.
So what moment did you know in that high school experience that you were going to go on and have a career in music?
Pretty much from the moment I met Ann, because she was just so very excited about it. That lady was just every bit the musician. And, and she was just a great example. She never forced it on anyone, she played her instrument a lot around us. She would practice a lot in her office. And, I just looked to her as somebody I wanted to be like and someone I wanted to be around. Every spare moment I had, I spent in the band hall just trying to learn and absorb as much as I could.
But what was that like? I know you're about 8 years older than I am, which means that we're talking about the early 80s. What was that like to have a female high school band director? That wasn't so common at the time.
Honestly, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it is, but
it wasn't common at all. I remember when I first walked in the band room up there at Andran, and I was looking around, and I saw her. She invited me in for an audition. And I looked around, and I go, "Where's the band director?" She goes, "I'm the band director." I said, "Oh, okay." And after that, I didn't think much of it. I was, all right, okay, great, let's get to work. And I'll tell you what, when I first walked in the summer band that first day in 1977 in August, that lady got up on that podium and she started working, and pretty quick, I forgot all about her being a woman. It didn't matter at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just saw I saw a great teacher, I saw a great musician, and just a huge inspiration.
So do you have anything, I know you've said a lot about Mrs. Betts, but do you have anything that you used from her that you can recall in your own teaching that you used every day?
Yeah, I do. Just her she just had just a plain spoken way. She had a plain spoken approach. It was just very simple. It was very concise, just the approach, and just very to the point. And, she explained things in a very simple way, but in a very common sense way that I just never forgot. There was nothing superfluous about her. She was just a very, very smart woman. I compared her to President Harry Truman, who was just very plain spoken and just had a lot of common sense. This is the way it should work.
I can't remember where I heard it, but, teaching is the idea of taking a complex thing and dividing it into simple to understand tasks or simple to understand ideas.
Yeah, there you go. And that's exactly what this lady did. And I never forgot it. I have a couple of clinics that I do around the country when I present to band directors, and and I tell her about a couple of those instances, that I share with them. And that was very influential. And it still is. I mean, those were lessons that I carry with me to this day, and I'm always very happy to pass it on.
So now you're in Gary, and you graduate from high school, and you go to Vandercook College of Music. And can you describe that experience in Chicago?
Vandercook was basically just an extension of my high school band experience. Again, I had wonderful teachers, and looking back on it, Mark, it was a great experience. I just relished in all the great moments. You learn from the not so great ones, but I have no unpleasant memories. There were tough memories, sure. There were things you wish you had done better, but Vandercook, again, was just an extension of my high school experience. It was basically Andrean High School College because I had great teachers. I'll just give you a few names. Victor Zajac, Dr. Ben Stoller, Jim Gilworth, Richard Britton. And these were people, that they nurtured me and they took me under their wing, and they were just very excited about helping me advance. And I love the fact that these people were just so interested. They all had so many other people that they had to deal with, but when I was around any of these guys, it was the same thing back when they had in high school. When I was around any of those people, all of them just had a way of making me feel like I was the only one that mattered to them.
Yeah, that idea of relationships mattering the most is something that guest after guest after guest talks about on this show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm curious, Willie, how do you get from the shores of Lake Michigan to the Mexican border on the Gulf of Mexico after college?
I love that question. I get it all the time. Well, here's what happened. I'll tell you what, if you got time for a quick story, what I was going to do, when I graduated, I had actually already taken a position in suburban Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And I was encouraged by all my teachers, all my college professors, to go check out the Texas experience, particularly the Brownsville experience. Back then, there were many of the directors down there who graduated from Vandercook, and we had just kind of established a pipeline in Brownsville, Texas. It was a very, very strong band program. It still is today. I mean, it has endured all these years. And my college president, Mr. Jim Gilworth, arranged for an interview. Okay, I mentioned a little town called Los Fresnos, which is just a little ways north of Brownsville, and the director of bands at the time at Los Fresnos, Mr. Armando Madrano, he was a Vandercook graduate. And so we arranged for an interview, and again, I had already signed on with my job up in Illinois. I was good there. I was satisfied. I was happy. I was like, okay, I'm good. But they set up the interview, and I thought, okay, fine, I'll fly on down there. I had never been to that part of Texas. And they mentioned they'll take me across into Matamoros, Mexico. I thought, okay, very cool. I'll just go down there and have me a quick Tex-Mex vacation. I'll enjoy the good food. I'll go across. I'll see Mexico. I'll shake some hands, meet some guys down there, say thanks, but no thanks, and come on home. That was my plan. Okay, so I went down there, hopped on a plane, 22 years old, first time I'd ever flown, gotten down there. I met some of the people and instantly just fell in love with the place. And, their dedication, to teaching and their passion for band music and for the band movement was just overwhelming. And I just knew right then and there, I have to be a part of this. I got to be around these guys. Okay. This is the place to learn how to do it. And what I did was, so I resigned my job in Illinois. That's another story in itself. We can talk about that later sometime. And, packed up my bags and got me a truck, threw all the junk on the back of it, and moved to Texas.
So how much time did you have from the time you got the job in Los Fresnos to the time that school started?
Oh, I'd say about a couple of months. Okay. It was a pretty quick transition. And the apartment complex I moved into was brand new. It had not yet been finished. So, some friends of mine who had already been teaching there a couple of years put me up for a couple of weeks. And that's how I got started. So it was a pretty whirlwind experience. I moved down there in 1985, and I stayed in that area for 12 years.
Do you want to talk about the Illinois suburban thing, or is that something we should not talk about on the air?
Okay, no, we can talk about it. That's not a problem at all. And, I was, for 2 weeks, for 2 weeks. I was the band director at Rickover Junior High School in Sauk Village, Illinois. Had the job, signed on. Didn't see a single kid, but I was the band director. And so when I went down and interviewed for the Texas position, again, like I mentioned earlier, went down there, loved the place. I came back. I got in touch with the superintendent and said, "Sir, I hate to do this to you, but another position has come along, another opportunity has come along that I think would suit me, much better. Not that yours wouldn't have, but this is a really good fit. So, I'm going to opt to go ahead and do this." Now, there's a timeline there. You can, after you sign on, you get so much time before, to resign. Okay. Like if there's a deadline, if you don't resign by this day, you're not leaving. You're keeping the job. You're contractually bound. Okay.
Right.
And I didn't know that at the time. I think the cutoff day was something like June 30th. And I walked around the 29th and said, "I'm not coming." Superintendent, needless to say, he was pretty visibly upset.
Uh-huh.
And I felt bad, but I had to follow my heart on that one. And I apologize, sir. Listen, I understand. I am so sorry, but, I got to go with my gut on this one. I mean, it was just a great opportunity. I mean, the facilities were all fantastic down there. Like I mentioned before, the people that were down there, just the influences and the resources were great. All these people down there had been very successful. They worked very hard. And so, that was just a wonderful thing to tap into. All right. And then on top of that, I guess I need to mention the fact that it paid about $12,000 more. That was $1,985.
Yeah, that's significant.
Right. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So now you were 12 years in Los Fresnos outside of Brownsville. Were you teaching middle school?
Well, in the area, I did both. I taught middle school. I taught some high school. And I was a high school assistant, mainly a middle school director. And during that time, I discovered I kind of went back and forth from high school to middle school my entire career. And, and at the end of it, in retrospect, looking at it, I really can't say which one I enjoyed more. They were both just, high school band, middle school band. They're two different disciplines. They're just different. Okay, it's kind of like legitimate music and jazz music. If you're a dedicated musician, you can't say they like one better than the other. It's two different disciplines. Now you can emphasize one. You can't, one or the other. But to say no, this is better than that one, I don't think is a fair call.
What was that first? What were those first couple of years like, as far as you learning the ropes of being a band director? What can we possibly take from your time there as a lesson for everybody else?
Okay, for young teachers, my advice would be this: get around people who are successful. Get around people who are doing what you want to do, and just listen. Get around them as much as you can, because you are who you're with. And the one thing I did was, we had a great network back in those days. We were encouraged to record our rehearsals via tape cassette. Remember those things, tape cassette?
Oh, I do.
Right. And so, we would tape those rehearsals, and I got in the habit to where I just taped my rehearsal weekly, and I would take it around, to many directors down there who would come to be my mentors. And you got to be pretty bulletproof, because when you take your rehearsal around and ask people to give you their honest opinion, you know what they're going to do?
Yeah, they're going to
give you their honest opinion. So you got to be pretty bulletproof, and you got to be willing to take some criticism and take some knocks. And I took some pretty darn hard knocks. Every week I would sit down on that sofa at Alan Clark's house, and we would listen to that tape. There'd be 3 or 4 guys there, and man, I would just be getting beat up from all angles, So every Friday I just went in there for my weekly epiphany, whoop, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done that. Whoop, I better go back and do that. But you know what that did, Mark? That made me stronger. Man, every week, I got a little better. And then Alan looked at me one day and said, "Man, you know what? You sure do got a lot of stamina." I go, "What do you mean?" I go, "Listen, man, we've done other, young teachers like this before, and we'd run them off in about 2 or 3 weeks." I went back most Fridays for a whole year. And I'll tell you what, I learned from it. And that was and I'm just really glad I hung in there, and I'm really glad I did that. So I would say to any teacher who aspires, to be successful, as a band director, look, you just got to hang in there. You got to just take the lumps. It's not going to come easy. And, and don't be afraid to get told, it's not very good. When a successful band director looks at you and says, look, man, it stinks. You got to do this, you got to do that, or you got to quit doing that. And the neat thing is, all those guys, as hard as I got beat up on at times, I always knew this. I never once doubted that those guys were pulling for me to be successful. As hard as they were on me, they wanted me to do well, and I always knew that. So that was the takeaway.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson. It's hard to bring someone into your band room. It's hard to let them listen to your mistakes. I mean, because, as much as we have success, we at least me personally, I tend to focus on the bad when I'm in that situation. It's like, what are they going to see that's wrong? It's like writing music, it's like, what's wrong with it, not what's good with it. That's how I.
Right. It's exactly like writing music. I like to tell people, listen, if I could get royalties on all the stuff I threw away or that didn't work, I'd be a millionaire.
Absolutely. That feeling of self-doubt is something that a lot of band directors and musicians deal with. And so it sounds like you were embracing it and really, especially when you're young, really kind of taking it on head on.
Well, the first couple of weeks I was like, oh my good golly, what did I get myself into? Now I'm way down there in Texas. I'm not in Illinois back there, so I can't jump the fence and run home. So I might as well just see it on through.
That's a really good point. That idea of being away from home, being somewhere where you don't have a safety net, that may have helped that.
Right. Well, it helped a lot because there was no safety net. I was like, okay, I just got to do it. And, and after a few weeks, you get used to it.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of like sticking your toe in the pool. You're going to jump. You don't want to jump. It's cold, but you finally make yourself do it. And then after about 3 or 4 seconds, everything's okay.
So now I'm curious about the rest of your journey in Texas. You mentioned that you were 12 years in the Brownsville area, and then you mentioned Lubbock and then the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so again, Texas is a big state. These are 3 very different places in Texas.
Huge state, 3 very different places. You are not kidding. Now, what I did was after I'm looking at your composer question sheet, and we'll get to this one later. You got a really cool question about how to achieve work-life balance. Well, here's what I did in Brownsville. Now, down there, I was a swinging single. Well, not so much swinging, but I was a single. I mean, for 12 years, I worked very hard. I loved what I was doing. I was at the band hall 12, 15 hours a day, and and that was all I did. I didn't have much of a social life, I didn't date. I didn't have a girlfriend, and I wasn't interested in any of that stuff. I just wanted to, build a fine band program, be a great band director, and just do that. And that's what I did. Now, after about 12 years, you want changes, Other things begin to take priority. You want to meet that special someone, that special lady, or that special guy, and you just want to do some things differently. You want to see a little bit more of the world. So I went ahead. What I did was, after 12 years in that area, I moved to Lubbock, Texas. I became a high school band director up there. And my goal was, I'm going to work hard, but I'm going to cut the hours in half. I'm out the door at 4:30, 5 o'clock, or whatever time it is. And I'm going to have a bit of a social life. I'm going to around town. I'm going to do some things. I'm going to meet me a nice girl. I'm going to get married. And that plan worked very nicely. A year later, after moving to Lubbock, Georgia came along. So, that was really pretty cool. But we'll talk about that one down the line. And so we did that. And then she and I moved to, we went a couple of places there in the Lubbock area. And then we moved here, Fort Worth, in 2001. And this is where we've been since.
Excellent. And so when you came to Fort Worth, what were you teaching there?
Okay. I was an assistant high school band director for 4 years. And it was around then when my composing career started taking off. So what happened was, and as they say in the Bible, you can't serve 2 masters. And I was in a program that was very, very highly competitive. I'm not, on the concert scene, on the marching scene, we were just getting into the POA game at that point, and that was all great. But I had to decide, am I going to be a full-time A-list, going and blowing, take no prisoners high school band director, or am I going to follow this composing thing? And, and so I went with the latter. So after 4 years of that program, I took a sixth grade teaching position where I just taught, sixth grade beginners all day, just a little way south of Dallas, a place called Red Oak. So I went there in '05, and I spent pretty much the rest of my career teaching at that level. I dabbled in high school, but I pretty much stayed at the middle school, elementary school band level until I retired. So I could just have time to, balance teaching. I still wanted to teach. I still, I still had the passion to teach. I didn't want to quit, but I was really getting excited about the composing end of it. I was excited about learning from it. I've always loved the literature, and I was just delighted to discover that I could actually create some of my own and help programs that way. So that was the way it went.
So, Willie, you mentioned that you moved to Red Oak after leaving Fort Worth to begin to sort of pursue your composing career. How did that start? When did you start writing pieces for band, and when did you start to know that maybe that was something that was going to become important to you?
Well, I like to tell people, Mark, that I actually had no intention. I had no aspirations to become a composer. I really didn't. I started, I'd always arranged. I had a natural knack for that, so I was always doing that. And back around 1993, what I was doing was I helped a friend of mine rearrange his marching music. This was at the time when the marching bands were switching from going all with published music to just getting the music especially composed for their groups. So it was that transition time. And so a friend of mine wasn't happy with the way his came out, so I kind of I made some tweaks, made some arrangements, and word got around if I could do that. So pretty soon we're arranging all this marching band music. And so that happened around 93. And I was working with a middle school 7th grade band. I was assistant middle school director. And I had several friends of mine who were doing similar jobs. And literature back then in the late 80s, early 90s was nowhere near as vast as it is today. So we would all sit around complaining, there's not enough accessible music for kids who have been playing 6 months, 1 year. And so what I did was I just got thinking, well, if I were going to write a march for my band, I would do this, I would do that, I would do that. And so I tinkered around and came up with my very first little concert march that I called Leaders of Tomorrow. And I took it to contest and I played it and didn't think it'd be a big deal, but, everybody was just telling me how happy they were with the composition. And I was like, well, okay, well, that's great. It really wasn't that big a deal. I just kind of moved some things around and, and just kind of did some thinking, and that's what I came up with. And I tried my hand at something a little tougher. So I wrote a grade 3 march that I called Plains West, which became my first published piece. And that came out about 1993. And here again, that was just an experiment. And a mentor of mine, Mr. Eddie Galvan, really pushed me pretty hard to get it published. I wasn't all that interested in getting published again. Like I told you, I had no real aspiration. At the time, I just wanted to be, a well-known A-list band director. That's all I wanted to do. And so, Mr. Galvan's behest, I sent it into a TRN music publisher, thinking, well, that's not going to go anywhere. But okay, good. So I just sent it so Eddie would leave me alone. And so a couple weeks later, I get a letter back from TRN. Hey, we'd like to publish it. I was like, whoa, you would? They said, yeah, we would. I said, well, okay, great. So, we did the paperwork and off we went. And I thought, okay, well, very cool. A few months later, I started sitting on the shelf at the band convention. I go, hey, great, look at my little march that I wrote, everybody. Isn't that cool? So that was my little brush with composition. Okay, I'm back to what I was doing. And then about a few months later, I got another letter from TRN. Can you write us 4 more pieces? I was like, no, it was all I could do to give you the one. But somehow, and I don't remember how I actually did it, but somehow, I pulled it together and I came up with 4 more, and they were all accepted. That's how
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're not the first person I've talked to on this show who told me a story like this. I mean, certainly many composers in the band community started this way. You know, it's actually unusual to come from my direction with actually degrees in composition. Most writers for this level started as teachers.
Right. And that was definitely my background. Jim Swearingen would be another great example of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, he was a very fine band director in the state of Ohio, and who dabbled a little bit in composing, and you know, and his pieces were just, as you know, were just, you know, really greatly accepted, and he's what we know him as today.
Absolutely. So you have some pieces published at TRN. I know you most closely associated with FJH and Brian. How did you get involved with FJH?
All right. Well, here, I'll back up and give you a little bit about the TRN experience leading into that. I was with TRN for 13 years and had a very close relationship with Mr. Jim Wiley, who had taken the business over after his father passed away, and Mr. Darrell Anderson, his brother-in-law. You know, they were the driving forces behind TRN. And I was with them for 13 years, and that was a fabulous relationship. FJH got going around 1999, and when I was teaching in Fort Worth, I had a friend of mine, Joe Fritz, who owned a music store, you know, that I frequented. And Joe goes, "Hey, Willie, have you ever heard of this FJH music company?" I go, "No, well, it's a new company, and you know, and they're looking for some composers, and you're doing some things. So I'm thinking this might be something you want to check out." You know, I've talked to the fellow who just became the editor, and you might send him some charts. Something may happen, something may not, but just send him some things. I thought, oh, okay, well, great. All right, and so he gives me this name and this phone number. He goes, "Well, just give him a call." So I called down there, TRN. "Hey, I was referred to you guys by a friend of mine who said you're looking for some pieces by some new composers, and I have this name, somebody here named Brian Bandages. How would I talk to him?" You know? And so what they did was they gave the address and said, "Okay, just send it to this name and send it to this address," which I did. And this was in 2001. I sent Brian 3 pieces, which he all rejected. But what he did was Brian did something that was just very cool. He wrote me a really detailed letter, you know, basically just telling me what he thought I could do, you know, to make the pieces more accessible. You know, here's some ideas for you. You could try this, you could try that. And it was a very nice letter. This was in July 26, 2002. I kept that letter. I have it right now. I'm holding it in my hand right now. Okay, so I mean, it's a great letter, and so I sent him 3 pieces, you know, and I got no. This was the kindest, most helpful no I'd ever gotten. And so, I was getting some pieces played at Midwest that was published by TRN, and then I actually met Brian at Midwest. And we ran into each other again, and he goes, "Listen, man, I sent you that letter, but I was hoping you'd send us some other things." I was like, "Well, okay, didn't think you were interested." No. If you got something else, let me just take a look. I can't make any guarantees, but, you know, I just like to see what you've done, you know, since the last time we communicated. And so I sent him 3 pieces. I sent him 3 more. Using the advice and the guidelines he gave me. Brian sent me a rubric, you know, of things like with ranges and, technique, usable rhythms, that kind of idea, and that's what I adhered to. And so I sent him 3 pieces, and all 3 were accepted, and off I went with FJH. That was in 2005.
All right, so how did this all... So you mentioned that you were with TRN, you were getting some music performed at Midwest, and what was that like to sort of... I guess what I'm trying to get at is, for someone who might be out there who's composing and they're sort of struggling to find some notoriety, when was the moment that you got sort of reached critical mass?
Well, I'll tell you, probably at the point where, where I met up with Brian. And things were coming on, pretty strong with TRN. And then Brian invited me to be, one of the FJH composers, and which I said that I went around with, and I struggled with it for about a year because TRN had been very good to me, and I didn't want to be in a position to where I was working between two companies. I had mentioned before, like the Bible says, you can't serve two masters. And so, I knew right then and there I had to go one way or the other. So it was a bit of a transition period. And, my wife was very, very helpful with helping me make that decision. And I finally just made the decision that I would part with TRN and go with FJH. Okay, and here again, I struggled with that for about a year. And I'll tell you, leaving TRN was one of the toughest things, I'd ever done because, they'd been so good to me and they were just, they were so great. But looking back on it in retrospect, that would have been about 13, 14 years ago. I have to be honest with you, I have no regrets. The FJH Music Company is a phenomenal company. Many of my very dearest friends this day are FJH composers, and it's been a great ride. And I look forward to working with these guys for years to come.
What does it look like when you sit down to write a piece of music? What's your procedure for doing that?
First thing, Mark, I got to have a title. I got to have a reason to write a piece. I can't just sit down and start writing. And now, because a lot of the commissions I get, like I did a piece, I just completed a piece for a group up in Minnesota, Maple Grove Middle School. And, the director there, the young man, Mr. Sam Queiss, he told me, listen, we would like to have something that's just native, to the Minnesota area. And so that gave me an instant in. I just looked around and thought, what would be a cool subject? And, came up with, an Indian chief that settled in the Minnesota, South Dakota area, struck by the Ree, which that was the name of the Indian. So, and, so I wrote a piece based on that. But my basic process, Mark, what I'll do is just at a very basic level, I'll begin with a melody. And then I'll put in it's really simple. And then, I'll put a bass line with that melody. And then that's where you fill in your harmonies and your counter melodies and your rhythms and that thing. So basically that's how it goes. I don't compose fast. I know there's guys and gals out there that can really move quick, and I've never tried to be a quick composer. I just like to take my time and just kind of think things through until we eventually get it done. And in the process, it just seems like, man, I'm never going to get this done. This is going to take me the rest of my life. But here again, it's just one foot in front of the other. And eventually, you have a piece. Yeah,
that's generally how it goes. I like the way you make it sound so simple, though.
Well, how can I say this? The process itself, it's easy, but it's not simple, if that makes sense. And this, composing is just a very grueling, frustrating, time-consuming process.
It really is. It really is. Sometimes it can go really fast. Like if things are clear, sometimes it's so clear, and then sometimes there's nothing that's clear, and you never know when that moment's going to come.
That's true. Every once in a while, you get one of those wow moments where you can just go. Mm-hmm. But in my particular case, I'll just tell you, it don't happen often. and that's totally okay. I'm good with that.
So you talked about how you write a piece of music. What if someone out there who's listening wants to commission you? What's your process for that? What should they be thinking about with you?
All righty. Well, on the initial contact, what I like to, here's what I do. If you call me for a commission, I'm going to pretty much interview you. Okay. Which is actually more like an interrogation. But, I'm going to want to know things like how long have you been how long have you been at your job? How long have you been there? Of course, the grade level you teach. And then let's talk, the big question, difficulty. How tough do you want it? How long do you want it? And, I guess that comes from having taught myself so long. Okay. And, and then we talk about those things and then here's the big one. When do you need it? So, it's just a matter of just sitting down and just talking through things and just talking out the details. And then for me, getting to know the director, himself or herself. Okay, that's a huge part of it, and just getting a feel for the person I'm working with. So for me, that's very important. And, before I commit to it, I'll get an email or I'll get a request from someone, and maybe I'll even get a text. But, you and I have to talk one-on-one before I write the first note.
So what's your timeline? Like if someone wanted a piece, like how many years out, how many months out does someone need to be?
Well, I'd like to be about 6 months to a year out. And I've made exceptions on that. I've taken some, like I took one recently for a friend of mine that I'm going to go ahead and churn out in a few weeks. I normally don't like doing that, but what I like is 6 months to a year. That way I've got plenty of breathing room. I've got time to think and time to plan, and put it together, for, that particular commissioning party for the client. Ultimately you want it to be a piece that the masses can use. And so all that's got to be in consideration. It's kind of a balancing act. If I'm writing, say, a grade 1.5 piece, I got to think about two things. I have to create a piece that's going to be special and exclusive to, let's say the Maple Grove Middle School band that I mentioned earlier. And then at the same time, after the premiere, I want it to be a piece that everyone can look at and that everybody can enjoy. I've gotten requests like, for example, like my flutes are really strong, my trombones are really weak, my trumpets are medium. Now, can you cater to those strengths? I've gotten requests like that, and those people say, no, I cannot, because there's a couple things that, especially if they've been around for a while. Well, number one, when this is published, first off, that probably wouldn't get published because if it's such a wild hybrid piece like that, no publisher worth their salt is going to pick it up, knowing all that. But if it ever did, that would basically rule out a lot of groups, who don't, have those same situations. And number two, talking to the director, listen, you're not going to, and what if you want to play this group again in 5 years where your flutes aren't strong, where your trombones are great? Okay, so basically you've edged yourself out on that one. We created for you a piece that you can only use one time and that nobody else is going to want to look at.
Exactly. That's a really great point. So what do you say to directors who have a situation where maybe they need to alter one of your pieces? Is that okay with you if they're doing it, so long as they're not trying to rearrange it? They're just doing it for their group?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I do a clinic on that. That talks about that very same thing, Mark. And I'll tell them, listen, if you need to rearrange, if you're missing trumpets and you're putting in, if you got to rewrite it for a clarinet or a saxophone, you feel free to do that. As long as you're not altering chord structure or changing the melodies or anything like that. If you're just basically writing it to accommodate your group, hey, man, do what you got to do.
Yeah, you just don't want to change the original material.
That's correct.
Changing orchestration to fit your group, that doesn't fall into the copyright infringement category.
No, not at all.
All right, so how much does grading play a role? I know that when I write a piece of music, sometimes the grade level, trying to fit a grade level, can get in the way. Other times it can serve as an inspiration. How do you negotiate that difficulty piece?
Well, here again, that's something that comes with experience. After having done it so many years, that's one of the first things I want to know. Now, what grade levels do we want? And, in the beginning, not so much. When you're honing your skills and you're like yourself, just trying to figure out, what actually works, at a given level. Like in the beginning, for me, it was like, okay, middle school level, high school level. And the longer I went, I became more, what do you want to say? I got more exclusive with, say, grade levels, like a first-year band or a second-year band, like levels within a middle school or levels within a high school. And so, that sort of thing just comes with experience. The more you do it, the more familiar you get with situations. And I would also attribute fact that I do so much traveling and I do so much clinicking, when you're actually down in there and you're working with these situations, and you're working with these kids, and you see firsthand what people are dealing with.
Do you have any sort of general advice you would give to someone who's trying to write music, a young composer maybe?
I certainly do. I would say, okay, do a couple of things. Number one, listen a lot. Today resources are vast. Look, YouTube, you can get on any of these publisher websites. You can download MP3s. I am blown away at how easily you can get your hands on material. So do a lot of listening, do a lot of score studying. If you go to the conventions like Midwest, man, no better place, when you're around these composers. You listen, you're in elevators with them. You're sitting next to, a great composer at a restaurant. They're all over the place. So, what you do is you just tap in, you plug in. And don't so much be afraid to tap one of these guys on the shoulder. I remember way back when I was in college, I got on the elevator and I got in next to this elderly gentleman. He was a really nice fella. He shook my hand. He said hello. He smiled. We had a neat conversation. And then he just happened to turn and I saw his name badge, Claire Grunman. So that's the Midwest experience. But what I would tell the young composers is, okay, I'm off on a tangent. Let me get back to this. What I would tell young composers is, number one, do a lot of listening. Number two, study scores. Okay? Julie Giroux said something very interesting. You want to get to know Mozart? You didn't need to sit down with him in a bar and drink beer. Just study his scores. Okay? Or John Philip Sousa or any of these guys. So that would be the other thing is I would advise a young composer, start small. Okay? Start with, say, a brass quintet or a flute trio. And just, get used to, writing parts and get used to making parts work together, working with harmony and working with different counter rhythms and that sort of thing. And then I would say I would advise against trying to go with a high-level, full-scale wind ensemble piece or orchestral piece when you're just getting going. Just start very small and work your way up, one foot in front of the other.
Mm-hmm. I used to start all my... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, in this business, the wheels of progress turn very, very slowly.
Yeah, I wish I could say that. I wish you could shout that from the mountaintops because it takes a lot of patience. It's just a matter of a drop in the bucket every day.
It is. And you just got to hang in there and just got to do it. See, there are many great composers out there, that we don't hear about, whose music we don't know because quite frankly, they didn't have the stick-to-itness. Composing is just hanging in there, okay? Lots of sleepless nights. We all love great composers and all their great music, but what we don't see is the process they go through. We don't see the fact that a lot of these guys and gals, go without sleep, for so many nights a week. And, it's a lot of sacrifice, but in the end, I think, so to the young composer, start slow, study a lot, and get around the guys and gals who are doing what you want to do. Just like band directing. It's just like association. You are who you're with.
All right, Willie. So in every interview, I ask my guests a set of questions that are common to all the interviews. And so the first of these questions is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Well, healthy competition. Let me start with that. I am the band director at Lake Country Christian School up in Northwest Fort Worth. We play home season football games. We don't march, we're the pep band, we sit in the stands and we play. And here's what I love about every single game. Our head of school will get on the PA and he will address both teams. May both teams come together. Although we're in competition, may we come together with honor. May we come together in solidarity. And while we are opposing each other in play in competition, the other team, wherever they're from, These are not our adversaries. They are our friends. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. To the other team, we wish you all the best. After the game, we wish you safe travels. We wish good health for you and your families. And when that man speaks, it's not superficial. It's very sincere. All right, but to get around to my point, healthy competition is having respect, for the opposing team or the opposing entity. Do you want to come out on top? Absolutely we do. But, there's a saying, even when you lose, you win. When you finish second, if you learn from it, if you made it better, you still won. Okay, that's healthy competition. Being happy with the group that might have come out a little bit ahead, being able to still shake hands when it's all said and done, still being encouraging no matter what end of the stick you're on. That's healthy competition. Unhealthy competition, on the other hand, when you look at the opposing entity as the adversary, when you have an us against them mentality, an ends justifies the means attitude, all those things, only, serve for a very unhealthy, unhappy environment. And we've seen those, unfortunately. In order for, say, a given entity to feel good about what they're doing, the other entity, has to not feel good. In order to come out on top, someone has to suffer. At that point, that's when it becomes unhealthy within your own organization. When competition becomes exploitative. For example, like when a group is going, to competition after competition after competition, weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend, without any consideration for the students or the participants or what they do in their individual lives. And again, competition is very cool. It's very good. It's very necessary when handled correctly, when dealt with the right way. And as educators, we have to be careful about the competition aspect because, here, think about this, Mark. Let me give you something to think about. Music was never meant to be competitive. Just think about it. At the professional level or even at the college levels, we don't deal with the competition aspect. Competition in music was by and large created by the schools over time. And that's where we got to be careful. When we go to these kids in the beginning, when we recruit them to play their instruments, we don't tell them things like, look, we want you in band so we can get you here, we can get you primed up to win these marching competitions or these concert competitions or these mariachi competitions or whatever. What are we telling these kids? Hey, we want you in band because we want you to have great experience learning an instrument. We want you to just, have great experiences, meet new friends, and have a lot of fun. That's what we tell them. And we can't, you bet. We can't ever forget why we got this thing to start with. I know why I got in because I was excited about playing the trumpet.
All right, I know that we mentioned this already briefly, but how do you achieve a work-life balance? And that's a tough question for band directors because many of us identify with what we do as being fun, as being our interest.
It is, yep. And that was my case for 12 years. I mentioned that earlier. For me, that was fun. I wasn't married. I didn't really even celebrate holidays. What I do for Thanksgiving? I crack a can of ravioli. That's what I did for a decade. That was my life, and I was fine with it. I was happy. Now, when I got married, all that changed. All of a sudden, I have a wife who likes to do things. I'm like, wait a minute. This lady likes to go to the movies. This lady likes to eat out at nice restaurants, not McDonald's and Burger King. Nice sit-down places. Hey, this girl likes vacations. And so as far as achieving a balanced work life, it's something you got to work at all the time, every day. It's something you got to think about. Like, we are masters at planning what marching show we're going to do next year or what pieces we're going to play for the next concert. And we got to be equally diligent in the, in the home life or in the social life. I found that after getting married, I have to sit down with my wife and say, I've got to spend a few minutes, to plan our life. Okay, hey, listen, let's take a vacation. We're going to take a little bit of time to just kind of plan this. And here's the cool thing. My wife and I, we do something I think is really cool. She's a real estate agent, so she's pretty busy too. And we often ask each other, hey, I haven't been neglecting you, have I? I'll ask her. She'll go, William, I haven't been, she goes, William, I haven't been neglecting you lately, have we? Well, and we're always, and we told ourselves we'd be honest about that. And so what we do once in a while, we just kind of get together and decide, listen, let's go a little bit more in this direction. Let's do a little bit more of this. Let's do a little less of that. And so, I mean, and it's something you can do. It's not hard if you work at it, if you stay on top of it.
So, Willie, what are the challenges facing music education, and how do we best meet them from your perspective?
Well, I mean, there are just so many things these days. I mean, it's not like it was years and years ago. The one thing is, I mean, there are just so many distractions, like there's early college. These kids are getting pushed to go to college sooner and sooner. And, and just within that, just motivating kids with all these distractions, with all the technology and all the other opportunities. Okay, it's a real struggle to just motivate kids to want to excel on their instruments. Let me see. So, I mean, as far as how to combat that, a couple things I would say is, in today's climate, this is the way I've always kind of done things anyway. But, when you bring children into your programs, just offer them the opportunities, for example, to participate in competition, marching band, or to try for a region band or a region orchestra or a county band. You offer the opportunity, you invite, you entice, don't badger, don't go after people, do things, don't chase kids with your program. You need to, you should, you better, so that's one challenge, and that's something that directors, have been phenomenal about. I mean, we've survived incredible adversities over the years. We've survived budget cuts, programs getting cut. Now the ones we don't hear about, we hear about programs getting cut all the time, but the ones we don't hear about are the ones, that actually develop, where one program got cut, another one sprung up over here. We hear about the ones that get cut, but we don't know the ones that actually, get started, or the ones that make a comeback after getting cut. The Phoenix programs, I call them. And they're out there, but you got to look for them. Okay? So those are there. So that's one. Another huge challenge, and what we have to do, and what we'll always continue to do, particularly music people, and here's what I've always loved about music teachers, not just band directors, music teachers. I mean, we are a very, very resilient lot. And we've stayed strong even these days where, quite honestly, the teaching profession is not favorably looked upon. I mean, the perception of teachers in America, I'm just going to put it out there. It's pretty scary. When you look at other countries where the teaching profession is very respected, it's very revered. And education flourishes because, parents and communities and governments are behind the educational system. And that's something that I fear we lack here in the great United States of America. But we press on. We don't give up. We stay stalwart, and we will win.
All right, Willie, if I could give you a time machine and set it to the day of your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
My younger self, get a life. Don't be in such a hurry. All right, now, let me qualify that answer. Now, what I would tell my younger self, actually, I would fast forward a little bit more to when I began I would tell my 22-year-old self, just take the time to smell the roses, so to speak.
Right.
Get a hobby, do something, make yourself do some things that, you just have to get away from the grind. And because, that makes you a more well-rounded person. That makes you a more sociable person. Okay, like I told you, back in the days, I was just working, and that was great. But, back in those days, if you weren't a band director, not even so much a music teacher, if you weren't a band director, you and I could have a conversation because I didn't know anything else. I wasn't interested in knowing anything else. Okay, I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't know about current events. I didn't know about history. All I knew was band. Okay, and that makes for a very short conversation with most people.
Right.
So I would just have to say, I would tell my younger self, look, expand your horizons. Go get a girlfriend. Go take up a hobby. Don't do something you thought you might not like it, but at least try it. Slow down. Have some fun. That's what I would have told my younger self.
All right. So now the next question isn't meant to be morbid. It's meant to kind of get what is the most significant work to you as opposed to your favorite. And so if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd want to conduct or hear or perform, and why?
Okay, because I've got a couple. I've got one that I would want a final piece I would want to conduct. I've got one that I would want to hear. A final piece that I would want to conduct is one that I think is phenomenal. It would be Third Symphony for Band by James Barnes. And I absolutely love that piece, and I'll tell you why. He wrote it at a very, very difficult time in his life. He had just lost his young daughter. And you can hear the passion in the first three movements. All the things you go through: denial, anger, disbelief, acceptance, and all those passions come through for me, particularly in the first and in the third movement. It's a 4-movement piece, but he just pours himself out. I've always been a huge fan of Mr. Barnes' music, but I see more of him in that particular piece than any other. I mean, it's as if he were just standing right there and just talking to you. That couldn't be any more clear than if he were standing in front of you, just telling you verbally what he was feeling, what he was thinking. And the fourth movement is really cool. Now, about 3 days after he finished the piece, his son Billy was born. And the fourth movement is very joyous. It's very upbeat. And basically, it replaced all the sorrow. And it took away, just all the bad feelings he had experienced in the loss of his daughter before. So it's really magnificent. I love the story behind it. That would be the one I'd want to conduct. Now, the one I would want to hear, one of my very favorite orchestral composers is Ray Vaughan Williams. And a piece that I have heard, I would bet you I've heard that thing hundreds of, maybe even close to 1,000 times. The Lark Ascending. It's just such a beautiful, calm, tranquil, unassuming piece. I mean, it's just wonderful music that doesn't attempt to grab you. It just kind of draws you to it. Okay, the music just said, okay, here it is for you to enjoy or for you not to enjoy. It's your choice. It's just really wonderful. And I've heard hundreds of versions of it, and my favorite one to date would be the one where the violin soloist is Miss Hilary Hahn. I mean, that lady just pours her soul into that performance. They all do, but she does like no other. And I will never get tired of listening to that piece.
Yeah, I lost you a little bit when you mentioned the composer, but for those who don't know, that's Vaughan Williams, The Lark Ascending. So, Willie, one question I ask composers is, if someone had never heard of your music, didn't know anything about you, and you could give them one piece of yours to listen to, what would that be?
Oh, boy. I would think, let me see. I'm going to just pick one here. I've got a grade 3 work I'm very proud of, Tutor Sketches, and which basically chronicles the court of King Henry VIII. It's a 3-movement piece. And, it's very lively. The second movement, is very slow, and then the third movement kind of brings it all back together. And, that's been a very successful piece for me. People like it. I'm appreciative of the fact, that people like it, that people perform it. So that would be an introductory piece. On the lower level, I've got a piece that I wrote at the grade 1.5 level that I've titled Carpathia, which basically chronicles the rescue ship that went the Titanic. I perform that piece a good bit with honor bands, and I always ask the kids, who's all heard of the Titanic? Of course, everyone has. Now, who's heard of the Carpathia? Hardly no one has. Well, this is the story of the ship that rescued Titanic survivors.
Willie, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Well, you can visit my website, WilliamOwensMusic.com, and what I do on the homepage is, I like to list all the events and, all the places that I'll be appearing. And, there's an opportunity to contact me personally. And, and you can read, you can read the bio. I've got a list of things that I've done. It links into the TRN and FJH websites, and visitors are always welcome to visit those sites. They can download MP3s, they can use scores, and we're just always happy to have people take a look and visit. How
can people get in touch with you, Willie?
All right. Once again, if you will visit my website, I'll just email me, William Owens Music email, or there is a email component on my website, okay? Just go to the email page or the contact page, and you can get me that way. Always happy to hear from you.
And that's William. Say the email address again. I'm sorry.
Okay, the email, WilliamOwensMusic@gmail.com.
Excellent. Willie, thank you so much for your time.
Mark, this was fabulous. Well, I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me. And for all you band directors that are out there listening, hey, thanks so much. And good luck to you guys. And best wishes for a super fantastic, successful year.